Lindy Graham, LCSW, is the founder and president of WellSpace Maine and WellSpace at Work. After working in her own private psychotherapy practice for over 10 years, Lindy recognized the larger community needed to reduce barriers to treatment and create greater access to high-quality, well-trained therapists in Maine, and so formed WellSpace Maine. WellSpace Maine provides adults, children, families, and couples with specialized treatment in the following areas: anxiety, depression, substance use, eating disorders, parenting support, adolescent health, and LGBTQ health. WellSpace Maine also provides a 2-year psychotherapy fellowship for therapists interested in deepening their clinical practice. WellSpace at Work, developed in response to the overwhelming strain that the pandemic has created for all Mainers, works directly with employers to provide confidential, effective, and readily accessible counseling for their employees. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. So, Lindy, welcome to the PR Maven Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I'm curious, how did you get interested in helping people with their wellness in the first place, and what drew you to this profession?
That's a great question. I think actually an experience I had in high school when I was in Germany, a group of us went to Germany for 3 weeks through this exchange program. And we were staying in a hostel in Berlin, and a bunch of the classmates went to a movie, and a handful of us decided to stay back. And one of the girls in the group was like, let's talk about how we actually feel about things and each other. And I was like, ooh, this is thrilling. The idea of talking, like dropping sort of some of the social, pressures of how you're supposed to act in high school sounded wonderful. It didn't actually go that well, but I knew that, I wanted to kind of have sort of more meaningful connections to people that were sort of based in authenticity and connection and being real. And I think that's what sort of led me to be interested in kind of helping people explore their sort of like inner thoughts and feelings in therapy. And then I also think the particular circumstance and how I grew up had an impact. So I grew up in this fishing town with a big influx of summer residents. And I was always really aware of kind of socioeconomic differences, like class differences. I had some relatives that had a lot of financial resources, but our family ourselves didn't necessarily. But then I had a whole other side of the family that had a lot of access, but not necessarily a lot of financial resources. And so I was always sort of interested in kind of people's like place in the world and like how they can sort of interact and how that impacts their belief systems and how much like opportunity existed and for whom. All of that really interested me. And I think that's what drew me to social work in particular, because it's really about person and environment. So I think the combination of those two things made therapy feel like a natural place for me to go.
Well, I love that you have sort of your origin story. And I'm curious, does that girl from high school, have you stayed in touch with her? Have you ever told her the impact that event had on your life?
I haven't actually. I've thought about it. I think my sister stays in touch with her. My sister still lives in that town. She's a high school teacher there. I think it would be really interesting to tell her that.
Yeah, I think she would probably really be interested in that too, because I know when I was in high school, it feels so, I don't know, your place in the class or in the school community feels very defined in a way. And I feel like as I've gotten older, I feel like I can just be friends with whoever I want. Doesn't really matter who you are. If I like you, I want to be your friend. And I think that age for me has given me more freedom.
Absolutely. I think that it's a really strange particular set of like social system beliefs that we have to like wade through, in high school that thankfully do not continue in an actual adulthood, thankfully.
I agree. I agree. High school is very hard, and I think junior high is even worse.
Yeah. I think I was like 25 years old before I could think about middle school without crying.
So, tell us about Well Space at Work and why you started it.
Sure. I think in order to talk about well space at work, you almost sort of have to sort of step back to the umbrella of our whole practice. So, our whole practice, I personally worked in the mental health field in my own private practice for 12 years before starting to hire additional clinicians. We eventually sort of named ourselves what we are now, which is Well Space Maine. And we're an outpatient private practice, and we take most insurances, and we do counseling and therapy for adults, families, couples, and children. We have a bunch of different therapists with different specializations. We have offices in Portland and Yarmouth. That's WellSpace Maine, our practice. And then WellSpace Work, we started in the pandemic, and that is because some of the same issues that we were seeing in the kind of individual experience of finding therapists, sort of the individual market, we were seeing those same problems for employers. And so we were sort of like, what is a possibility for creating greater access for employees to find counseling? And so we started contracting directly with employers so that they could kind of create a more seamless process for their employees to connect with clinicians.
Well, I think that the model is really great, and it was really in response to the pandemic that you started it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think that we saw some of these access issues before. So the way that it works to find a therapist is you either, get a recommendation from someone, or you get a list of names from your PCP, or you search the online like Psychology Today search engine and find a therapist and call. You have to call a bunch of people. Often people don't call back. Often people are full. That has been like exponentially true because of the pandemic, because so many people are struggling right now. And so for people who are already overwhelmed, it's just, not the easiest process to navigate. And so the idea of well space at work is almost like, the employer themselves has like a practice kind of down the road where they can say, oh yeah, go to see these people. These people will help you. And so because with the very first contract we had was with Allagash Brewing Company, and they were just really aware ahead of time that we sort of would have this coming mental health crisis. And so in the early summer of 2020, just a handful of months into the pandemic, they were interested in sort of creating something with us, and we worked together to kind of come up with the structure of the first initial program that we named then Well Space at Work. And now we do do these employer contracts with other companies as well.
Is this a unique model, or is it something that you created in your mind?
Well, I've since learned that it exists in other places, but I feel, in bigger, to a greater scale. I think what's unique about our well space at work is that we are really focused on Mainers and improving the lives of Maine employers and employees. So, and additionally, so some of this model does exist elsewhere, but a lot of those have almost exclusively kind of telehealth, telemedicine appointments. And while that is what we're doing right now, the benefit is that when you connect with us and you start seeing us, via these telehealth appointments, eventually we are going to get back in the office again, and people can go back to sort of popping out of work at various times to go down the street to see their actual therapist, and we'll be able to treat them in person because we are local. There are other benefits actually to the telehealth piece that I think will always exist for us because we can reach people, rural Mainers who don't have a lot of therapy options where they are. This does kind of expand access for them. And so much of this has been about creating greater access. So we want to always have some part of that as part of our program.
Yeah, I think telehealth is a really great model. I know that I'm on the board of the Maine Seacoast Mission, which has a 70-foot boat that goes out to the islands off of Acadia National Park. So the islands in Penobscot Bay, and there's a nurse on board this boat, an RN, and she connects people from the islands with specialists on the mainland that need treatment, whether it's for cancer or for any kind of illness. So that's something I think I should make an introduction to you and them because that could be a good fit for your practice.
Absolutely. That sounds really wonderful. I'm also thinking of somebody who has a sort of brand new business that's sort of about helping create access to care in different ways. And I'm thinking those two should talk to each other.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk after this and make that happen.
Great.
So you mentioned Allagash Brewing Company as your first client for your well space at work. Who are your other clients?
We have a small kind of science and engineering firm based out of Westbrook called St. Germain. And we also just recently started working with Rising Tide Brewery.
Well, that's interesting because probably when you first created this practice, you didn't imagine that you would be specializing in craft breweries, but it seems like that's a specialty.
Yeah, I know. The owner of Rising Tide, she was like, "You can call it well space at breweries."
Actually, I really love the way that I have been going to Rising Tide, and I love the way they have the outdoor fire pits. And so I am thinking that wouldn't be such a bad place to do therapy, right? But I know that there's confidentiality, so it might not work that well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's a really important part of this model too, is that we still uphold the guidelines that are dictated by, our expectation of care, right? So, and our, what's required of our license and our, board of ethics. It's just a no-brainer that we make sure the confidentiality is intact, even when we have employers that are setting up these contracts. So we don't share any information at all with the employers about who's using it or how frequently. Any metrics that we give to the employers is really, we ensure that it's completely de-identified. So there's no chance of any personal health information being shared. And that is a really important piece because I think, employers are, and I think this is part of why our first clients are breweries, right? Because people are, breweries are pretty progressive in terms of thinking about how to care for their employees and how to create just like a better, easier kind of experience in general in life. I mean, Allagash has something called a gear closet, which is unbelievable. I wish that I'm going to have to create one for our staff, I think. It's like you can go and borrow like ski equipment and kayaks and snowshoes whenever you want. You just like sign them out. So I think that, that's a really great example of sort of how helping with an employee's mental health can take all kinds of shapes and forms.
That sounds like a really great idea, that gear closet, because some sports do have a pretty high barrier to entry. I'm a skier, so I know what the equipment costs. And I think to have access to equipment, that sounds like a really great benefit.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So, workplace wellness is a big issue, obviously, and especially at this time in our history. Why do you think that is? And how are you trying to help curb the issues related to mental health at work?
Well, I think wellness in general has sort of been on employers' radar. Obviously, the pandemic put health and safety so front and center that the kind of natural sort of shift from there was to think more broadly about what creates safety for people. And knowing that we so dramatically shifted the way that most people work. People went from being, in their offices from 9 to 5 to being in their homes. If they have a dedicated office space, that's great, but they may not. And, not only are people home all the time and not having a lot of those interactions that they might have really enjoyed with their peers at work, they also may have a house full of children. And that, I certainly know from my own experience, adds a unique, complex layer to making it all work. And so I think, the statistics are, that most people are experiencing much higher levels of stress and anxiety than ever before. It used to be on average, like at any given time, 1 in 12 Americans would be suffering from a major depressive episode, and it's now 1 in 4. So there are a lot of reasons that employers are just sort of, much more aware of that. And I think it's really kind of, one of the gifts of the pandemic is that it's really taken kind of an afterthought, sort of what do we do for the mental health of our staff, to really putting it front and center. And so that feels, so important and so beneficial. I think 70% of employers listed uh, concerns about the mental health of their staff as being one of their primary um, items to be putting on their kind of to-do list for 2021, sort of looking at what additional services they need, what other supports they may need, what other things besides traditional therapy and counseling exist that can enhance wellness in general. So I think that's all really wonderful. And so the idea of what we have, lots of employers have really involved EAP programs, and that's great. Like, we are sort of a separate kind of freestanding um, you know, kind of health program benefit. It's almost like we are sort of an added benefit. It can be bolted on to a group insurance that it's just sort of saying, hey, this kind of is ease and speed of access. It's affordable because the employers are covering the cost. We have some, collection of basic data that then can be used to see its effectiveness. It helps to reduce stigma because, and if an employer is saying, hey, we really care about your mental health and we're giving you this ease of access to this practice that you can go get therapy, that's really doing a lot to say, that it's absolutely okay to seek help for mental health concerns. And then it's also that we sort of provide a continuity of care, right? Because program, even if a company says, okay, let's do a 6-month contract, and then after that, employees will need to pay for their own mental health care. Because we are in network with most insurances, there's sort of a seamless transition where you can stay with your clinician if you really like them. You just are then using your insurance instead of having the employer pay for it. So, this is just one of many options that employers have that I think kind of helps to think about, you know, keeping mental health on the radar.
Yeah, I know just for me personally, when I feel good, in my mind and my body, I'm so much more productive. And, there are days at work when I am just like on top of the world and I can just get so much done. But there are days when I'm feeling a little low and I don't have much energy and I might have not got enough sleep or, I might feel a little depressed myself. And it's so hard to kind of get out of your own way. There's, especially if you've got big projects at work, um, you have to be well in order to perform well, I think. So it really makes so much sense for an employer to help their employees. And it sounds like, in a way, it's almost like try before you buy, because you can take advantage of these services through your employer before you start paying for it through your own insurance. So there's so many advantages. I think every employer should do it.
Yeah, it's a really, it's definitely a really sort of considerate added benefit that people might be offering for their staff. So, I mean, obviously, we're biased. We think it's cool.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I should mention that I have been working, or my agency has been working with Lindy and her practice for several months now. So we have gotten to know each other, and it has been really a great experience to be working together with Lindy. I did not know you personally, prior to COVID, certainly. So amazingly enough, you and I have never actually even been face to face, which is really hard to believe, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
Just wait, Lindy. I'll admit I'm a little overwhelming.
Well, I've been thinking, I've been sort of like, are we going to get to Sugarloaf this year? Because I am going to hunt you down and
Oh yeah.
wave my ski poles like a maniac when I see you.
Yeah, we can ride on the super quad on opposite ends of the lift and talk the whole way up. To be honest, I love skiing, but I love riding the chairlift too and meeting new people. I go in the singles line and I get to meet a new person every time, and I have so much fun talking to people. I've actually thought about bringing my microphone and doing podcast recordings on the way up.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll be back shortly with more from Lindy Graham. But first, I want to talk about my book, which I published actually at the beginning of COVID. It's called Grow Your Audience, Grow Your Brand. It's available on Amazon.com as a paperback, Kindle, or Audible edition. And it's a book that helps people with growing their network and growing their personal brand, essentially by taking care of their audience. And part of it is actually really knowing who your audience is and thinking about them as you're doing your marketing and PR. So we're giving away a free Kindle version. If you go to prmaven.com/giveaway, you can sign up for that. And we'll be back with more from Lindy Graham in just a moment.
Do you want to grow your client or customer base? Perhaps increase brand awareness? Maybe tell your unique story more effectively? Of course you do. But you may be worried that you don't have enough expertise to make that happen. Well, no worries, PR Maven Nation. Let the PR Maven herself, Nancy Marshall, show you how easy it is to get your message across effectively using a powerful yet simple tool, a message map. Nancy's training is often called informative and constructive, well-designed and impactful, with a perfect blend of theory and real-life experience. You will leverage Nancy's expertise to create your own message map when you register for this comprehensive online video training course, which is broken down into 4 easy-to-understand modules. Normally, this course is priced at $147, but for listeners of the PR Maven podcast, that's you, PR Maven Nation, it's only $29 when you enter the code word podcast during enrollment. It even includes a workbook and bonus content to guide you through the process. So go to prmaven.com and click on the Message Map Mastery course to enroll today. Remember, enter the word podcast during enrollment for a special discounted price of $29.
So welcome back. And today we're talking with Lindy Graham, LCSW, who's founder and director of WellSpace Maine. And I'm going to dive right back in with more questions. Lindy, what is the difference between WellSpace and WellSpace at Work?
Sure. So it's similar to what I described earlier. WellSpace Maine is a freestanding practice. So we are a private practice with 2 offices, one in Yarmouth and one in Portland, Portland being our larger office. Although we're going to need more office space because we've hired a bunch of people during this pandemic. We aren't going to fit anymore. So that is a practice, and we have a number of therapists there who specialize in a variety of presenting problems. So we have therapists that do couples work, family work, child and parent therapy, which is its own particular thing. We also have play therapist for children. And we also specialize in things like eating disorders, depression and anxiety, substance use, LGBTQ health, PTSD, and trauma. So we were really specific in our hiring to make sure that we weren't just specializing in one thing. Certainly, there's a great benefit to practices that have a narrow specialization. We just decided that we wanted to be kind of one place where people could go for a variety of presenting issues. And that actually helps with the employer side in terms of well space at work. But I'll still sort of clarify a little bit more of what the well space practice is. So individuals can reach out to us and express interest in therapy. We then speak with them about what their needs are and then pair them up with who we think is going to be the best fit. So that's how the process works on the individual side. And then WellSpace at Work is still under the umbrella of WellSpace Maine, but it's specifically working directly with employers to contract with them to provide them a path that's very fast for getting their employees into our practice. So it's really just eliminating that whole cumbersome process of tracking down a therapist and seeing if they have openings. We have a dedicated team that works with the employees, and we have a dedicated phone line and email for each individual contract that we have. So Allagash has their own phone number, Rising Tide has their own, and that way we kind of can really seamlessly put people with the well space at work clinicians. So the well space at work clinicians work in both capacities, both as seeing the employees and also working in the WellSpace Maine practice. So WellSpace Maine serves also as a nice kind of foundation for the therapy itself. And then additionally, WellSpace Maine has kind of like a third kind of arm. We sort of under the umbrella of WellSpace Maine is the practice, WellSpace at Work. And then the third thing is a therapy training program. So for clinicians who are graduated from their grad school program, they are already fully, an MSW or a clinical counselor. They still have to work for 2 years under the supervision of another clinician. And so historically, for people who want to be therapists, they have to go work in a hospital setting or in a school setting where they're not necessarily doing one-on-one therapy, but they're getting their hours and their experience to then become fully licensed. But then once they're fully licensed, it can be kind of a challenging process to figure out how they transition to becoming therapists from there. And so we offer this 2-year program for people to either come straight through and learn how to be a therapist after they've already graduated. So they obviously have their full foundation of knowledge, but this is really deep, kind of intensive training to become a really great therapist. And we have different modules and we have a whole program planned that we provide for everyone. So that is the third arm. And it's really, I think, really rewarding for all of the clinicians that are supervisors to be able to help new clinicians, just do the work that they're doing. And also we're growing the pool of Maine therapists by having this training program because, we have such a shortage. And that's particularly true now in the pandemic. So that's kind of the difference between the three different pieces of our practice.
Wow, you're actually doing economic development for the state, I believe, by attracting people. I mean, we've talked about live and work in Maine, and actually, I'm going to be interviewing Katie Shorey from Live and Work in Maine later on today. So,
oh, great!
I think that you're providing a great service to our state.
That's great. Yeah, and I mean, it feels in some way selfish too because we want to know, the quality of the work that people are, providing. And so this just feels like such a great way to feel really good and confident about the clinicians that are available. And, after they finish their training, they can stay working for us or they can go out on their own. And we're like thrilled to be able to have, additional colleagues in the field that we can refer to.
Yeah, that's great. Well, is there advice that you can give to our listeners who are employers who have employees who may be struggling right now?
Yeah, I think that this is such a unique and challenging time. And I think the most important thing to do is to kind of acknowledge that there is no difference between any person who's struggling with any mental health concerns and anyone else. Like, we are all the same. There is no difference. And frankly, I don't know anyone who hasn't struggled at least in some way during this incredibly challenging time. So starting from a place of not othering anyone who's struggling feels really important. I think additionally, thinking more broadly about safety right now. So we talked about, how it's, every employer has had to, go through quite a process to ensure everyone's physical safety. And that is actually incredibly important too for people's emotional well-being. So that safety in their physical space, in their, the protocols that are in place, that goes a long way to create greater emotional safety. Further creating emotional safety by acknowledging that people are struggling, I think is really beneficial. Being flexible about how people work. I think about the parents, right, who have, even if their kids are in school, that means 2 days a week for most people, because the hybrid model for most places is just 2 days of in-person teaching. And so the rest of the time, kids are home and parents are having to juggle. So if they have a staff meeting at a certain time, then the other parent might need to be on kid duty. And so it's really about figuring out systems that work best for people at home, and that the employers are really doing all that they can to support that and to acknowledge that, somebody may be working strange hours because that's when they're free, and that needs to be kind of like accepted and encouraged. I also think, programs like ours, sort of finding external support, can be incredibly beneficial, so that, sort of above kind of some of the EAP services, where sometimes people can feel like, I don't know, I'm calling this 800 number. And what is that? What happens then? Usually you call those 800 numbers and they say, here's a list of therapists in your area. And then, you only have like 3 sessions that are covered. And so to sort of have something additional like WellSpace at Work, where, people can see somebody local and it can be ongoing, can be really a huge help for people right now.
Lindy, what is a book, an app, or a website that you have found helpful, and why?
Yes, I am happy to share this. A friend of mine told me about this book called Fair Play by Eve Rodsky. A few years ago, there was an article in Harper's Bazaar about the emotional labor that tends to fall on mothers in particular. This is particularly true in heterosexual households. But this book really kind of takes that to like the next level. And so a bunch of my friends and I have been reading it, and it comes along with these cards as well. And it's really about kind of looking at, from a lot of different perspectives, kind of why women tend to hold kind of the bag of not just sort of doing more in a household, but also kind of the sort of psychological energy that it takes to make sure that everything is working. So it may be that a dad is the one who brings a child to school, but maybe it was the mom who made sure that the lunches were packed and all the schoolwork was done and packed, and like iPads were charged and packed, and right. And that, it's not just the action of that event, but it's also just all of the kind of like list keeping in one's head. And so we've all been reading it, and the cards are really cool because you actually like divide them up between you and your partner and say like, okay, who is doing this one? What is the percentage of the time that one is doing that one? So you kind of like move away from shared activities to just give the card completely to one partner or the other. Because I find, certainly in our household, in the middle of the pandemic, there's just so many things that just like fall by the wayside. And so to sort of say, okay, if I am 100% on like dish duty, then I know if I see this cup sitting in this random room, like, yes, somebody should have cleared it and brought it back to the kitchen, but like, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to just like know that I'm the one doing all of that. And it just sort of creates so much clarity in a time when everybody has so much more on their to-do list than they ever had before. I mean, that's my experience of the pandemic. It's like there's relentless like just volume of tasks to be completed, much more so than before. I know some people are having the experience in the pandemic that things feel quieter, but I think for, working moms of kids a certain age, it's a little bit chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, your emotional well-being as a parent is really important too, because I'm sure your kids are sensitive, like my kids were. They could tell, whether mom and dad were in a bad mood or a good mood, or whether they were getting along or whatever. So I think that a book like that would be really helpful. So I'm glad you suggested that. Fair Play by Eve. And is it Rodsky?
Yeah, Rodsky.
All right, cool.
It's great. It's really great. I feel like I didn't, do it justice, but I really highly recommend it because it's also just like validating, I think, for people's experience of, the enormity of everything that they're trying to keep together at this particular time. And I, in particular, am working a lot. And so I bet my partner is holding far more of the cards than I am right now.
Yes, you have been very ambitious during the pandemic. I know. So, Lindy, how can people get in touch with you if they want to follow up?
I mean, I can be reached just on my email. We have a website. My email is lindy@wellspacemaine, and our website is just wellspacemaine.com. You can find kind of bios of our clinicians on there. There's a separate page that kind of describes what we're doing with WellSpace at Work. We have online forms that you can fill out if you're interested in counseling. So you can also fill out those forms if you're interested in, as an employer, interested in the WellSpace at Work program. Also, we are hiring therapists, so people can reach out to us that way.
That's great. Well, Lindy, this has been a really great conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time in your busy day because I know you have a lot going on. And I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure everyone in PR Maven Nation is going to enjoy it too.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really had a nice time speaking with you, and I am so hopeful that we'll be able to meet in person sometime and
ride that chairlift at Sugarloaf.
Exactly.
And then ski down to Bullwinkle's and have a cup of coffee.
That sounds perfect.
All right, Lindy. Well, I hope you have a great day, and I hope everybody in PR Maven Nation has a great day too. That's it for this week's episode. I'd like to thank you for listening, and if you feel that you've gotten value out of today's conversation, consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever app you're using to tune in. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should do so. I release a new episode each week, and subscribing will make sure you get an alert when there's a new episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation by going to prmaven.com/nation and clicking join. It's free, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you have an Alexa-enabled device, be sure to add the PR Maven Marketing Minute to your daily flash briefing menu. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.